So I figured this was going to come up quite a bit after everything that's gone on so far with Embracer Group and Square Enix, that having to do with more acquisition rumors. But it seems like this is really making the rounds now because it kind of lines up with the idea that Square Enix is making a play selling off Western intellectual properties and studios in order to be acquired by another larger company. And that potentially could be Sony. We're going to go over this one here today, guys. If you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button. And if you're new here to the Spawnwave Plus channel, make sure you subscribe down below. So first off, let's head over here. This was posted up by Push Square. Say multiple sources said Sony is buying Square Enix, allegedly, but who knows? And we'll touch on the idea of these acquisitions leaking out early. Say, remember when there was big chatter about a Sony acquisition, specifically from industry veterans Jeff Grubb and Greg Miller? Both were talking about Square Enix. Said when I talked about the 3 rumors I'd heard, and one was an acquisition, this is the one I'd heard. This is from Greg Miller on his episode of PS I Love You podcast. I heard that PlayStation was acquiring Square, and I heard that from multiple different sources. And I at least want to give credit here to Push Square because they make a very good point, one that I immediately thought of here, and that has to do with Embracer Group and Square, the deal that went down between them. I mean, that's one that really caught the internet off guard. It wasn't something you saw being teased online, specifically Embracer Group. I feel like every other day we see someone teasing some large acquisition, right? Just through rumors. And I do question the idea of something this sizable leaking out this far in advance, because there would be serious consequences, because it could lead to things like insider trading and investing with some pretty serious knowledge ahead of time. It's one of the reasons that when a large acquisition happens, you would see stock jump for other larger publishers. Like when Microsoft announced that they were buying Activision Blizzard, Ubisoft stock jumped like 10 or 15%. EA's jumped as well. And it's because investors are looking around like, okay, that's a pretty serious acquisition that just got announced. Where can I go and try to get in early if more of these acquisitions are going to be happening? Not because they know that one of those companies is going to be acquired. So I do tend to question the idea that just randomly people would have this kind of knowledge. I mean, this is high level stuff, and then it would just kind of get thrown around through the rumor mill. Not that like Greg Miller or Jeff Grubb are hearing from like the higher ups at Square or Sony, but the fact that someone could potentially be running around with this information, even within Square or within Sony. Like I said, this is like high level stuff that's usually kept extremely quiet and confidential. Now, with all of that said, would it really benefit Sony from buying Square? And I think this is the biggest question you have to ask, because Square is not going to be cheap for Sony. I mean, none of this stuff's really cheap. We're talking about billions of dollars at the end of the day. I mean, they just bought Bungie for over $3 billion, and that didn't really include a wealth of intellectual properties like we see with Square. Sure, Destiny is in there, right? But that's kind of it for Bungie. They have other projects that they are working on right now through investments with other companies like NetEase. But really, Sony bought them with the idea of, okay, you are going to help us with this roadmap that we've internally created for like the next decade plus for all these live service games. That makes sense for an investment of over $3 billion, because they will most likely make that money back in the long run if like 2 or 3 of these live service games end up catching on and being successful. If you look at some of Sony's other investments and acquisitions they've done, the one that comes up is Insomniac, but that was a pretty good pickup because they're leaning on them heavily with their deal and partnership with Marvel, and that goes beyond Spider-Man now. Clearly, they knew that was something they were working on, and they picked Insomniac to do something like this new Wolverine title. So Insomniac is very important for Sony, and it makes sense why they would want to lock them down and not keep them as like this second-party relationship. Sony also acquired Nix's, but clearly that's mostly for PC development and porting. After Horizon Zero Dawn and that not launching in the best state, and a lot of things had to be patched out post-launch, Sony, wanting to make sure that their quality is high with this PlayStation Studios branding, wanted to make sure they brought in someone who had past knowledge with that, and, well, that's Nix's. God of War came out, by the way, and I don't necessarily think Nix's had a massive, like, effect on that, but from what I can tell, God of War has done very well out of the gate when it comes to functioning on PC. And then otherwise, it's studios that have essentially proven themselves to Sony over time, like Housemarque or Bluepoint. The one that is a bit head-scratching right now is Haven. Whatever they're working on impressed Sony so much that they said, nope, we have to acquire them. This is going to be big, right? Or I don't know, maybe they were moving along so well, they immediately said, hey, you're going to become part of PlayStation Studios because we trust you guys here with this development. Or they wanted to have more resources involved, maybe from some of their other first-party studios. We do hear that they will essentially share work and help each other behind the scenes, and maybe that's what Sony wanted to do. It's going to become a lot more clear, I think, one way or the other, once we do get an idea as to what Haven is actually working on when that game's revealed. Which brings us back to the idea of Sony buying Square. I'm not really sure why they would do it. I have reasons for many of the other acquisitions they've made. I'm having a hard time coming up with one for what would probably be their biggest acquisition. Like I said, Square's going to cost more than all of those other studios and everything that they've purchased previously. If you look at the best-selling franchises, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, Kingdom Hearts, the Mana series, we know that Tomb Raider is out the window now since that's now going to be with Embracer Group. But I'm looking at this and I'm thinking, okay, Square already gives all those games to Sony anyway. Like, Sony just shows up with a bag and they get timed exclusivity or just exclusivity for Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy 16 appears to just be slated indefinitely for PlayStation and PC. Final Fantasy 7 Remake still hasn't gone anywhere else for consoles. It's gone to PC. But the relationship between Sony and Square seems pretty solid as it is. Sony gets what they want from them, and that's pretty much worked out. So for Sony to come in here and say, well, we're going to buy Square Enix, we're going to pay out a bunch of money, and we're going to take on a lot of risk with that money that they're paying out, a bunch of employees, and the need to develop and hold up several long-running franchises, whereas before, they can just kind of exist and they'll get Dragon Quest, or they can just kind of exist and they'll get Final Fantasy, or invest probably tens of millions, maybe $100 million or so into Final Fantasy, and we'll just have it as an exclusive for our platform. It just seems like a strange thing for Sony to do, unless they had ideas just outside of games, because we do see them investing in things like Crunchyroll, and they have their movies and film division. Maybe they want to take Final Fantasy and work more on it as just an overall media intellectual property with TV series, movies. Of course, the merchandise is already very popular, and then the games. And the only other reason I can think of right now that Sony would say, nope, we have to buy Square, is if there was some looming threat of an acquisition that would come in and potentially take games away from Sony. People will say Microsoft. Microsoft is kind of doing their own thing right now with Activision Blizzard. They got to work all of that out. Then, of course, there's the idea that regulation with Japanese companies and foreign companies coming in and buying them. That's a whole thing you have to go through. But still, if, say, Tencent or Amazon or Apple, Google, any of these figured out how to do it, get in there and potentially make a bid on Square, who then is like, well, we want to sell. I mean, yeah, then Sony might say, well, we kind of got to make a move on this, or we might lose some pretty lucrative franchises for us like Final Fantasy. I just keep looking at the idea of Sony buying Square, and it just keeps coming back to me as like a fan fiction acquisition that's really being suggested here. And then obviously people bring up the idea of, can Sony even afford Square? I feel like if Sony wanted to do it, they could figure it out. Even if they don't have like the amount of money cash on hand, they can do stock, they can finance. We always sit here trying to figure out, can they really come up with that kind of money? Yeah, I think Sony can. It's just, do they want to, and do they feel like they would benefit heavily from it? That's the real question there. But let me know what you guys think about all this, because the rumor mill continues to spin with these acquisitions, and apparently Sony is up now looking into Square Enix. But either way, I think the Embracer Square Enix deal has to wrap up before any of this stuff is even a possibility, and that's something that'll happen towards the end of summer. Thanks guys for watching, and I'll see you next time.